Work. Every Tuesday. My husband put on the same brown jacket and left the house at 9 in the morning. For 38 years, he did not miss a single week. I thought he was just careful with money. I thought I knew him. After he died, the bank called me. They said, "Ma'am, there is something you need to see." When I opened the file, my hands began to shake, because what I found was not savings. It was not safety. It was a secret my husband carried alone for decades. And in that moment, I realized I had lived beside a man I never truly knew. Every Tuesday, my husband left the house at 9 in the morning. He wore the same brown jacket, even in summer. He kissed my forehead, picked up his car keys, and said, "I'll be back before lunch." For 38 years, he never missed a single Tuesday. I never asked where he went. That is the truth I carry now. We were married for 42 years. Richard was a quiet man, not cold, just gentle and reserved. He fixed broken chairs, watered the plants, paid the bills on time. He was the kind of man neighbors trusted, the kind of husband friends praised. "You're lucky," they would say. "He's steady, reliable." And he was. Our life was simple. Morning coffee at the kitchen table, evening walks around the block, Sunday dinners with soft music playing in the background. We never argued loudly. We never slammed doors. We grew old together slowly. I thought that meant I knew him. I believed love was made of routine, of shared silence, of small habits. And for decades I was content. Richard handled our finances. "I'm better with numbers," he used to say. I trusted him. I trusted him because he never gave me a reason not to. We were not rich. We were comfortable. We saved for retirement. We traveled once a year. We fixed what broke. I believed our life had no hidden corners. But every Tuesday, he left. I would watch him from the window. Sometimes I waved. Sometimes I didn't. He always turned once, raised his hand, smiled. Then he drove away. I never followed. I never asked. Because love felt safe. Because routine felt honest. Because I believed nothing important could hide in plain sight. Then one winter morning, Richard did not wake up. His side of the bed was cold. I touched his shoulder. He did not move. The house filled with quiet panic. Doctors spoke gently. He passed in his sleep. Peaceful. That word stayed with me. I planned a simple funeral. Neighbors came. Friends hugged me. Everyone said the same thing. He was a good man. I agreed. For weeks I moved through the house like a visitor. His shoes still waited by the door. His jacket hung on the hook. Every Tuesday, I woke at 9. And no one left. The silence felt wrong. One afternoon, the phone rang. A woman's voice said, "Mrs. Turner, this is the bank." I expected paperwork. Instead, she said, "There is an account in your husband's name. We need you to come in." My heart slowed. "I don't understand," I said. She hesitated. "There are documents only he accessed." For many years, I drove there with shaking hands. Inside a small office, a folder waited. It was thick, too thick for savings. The banker opened it, and my life changed. I sat in the chair across from the banker, my hands folded in my lap. The folder was heavy, but it wasn't the weight that made my chest tighten. It was the truth waiting inside. She opened it slowly, as if even she felt the gravity of what I was about to see. Every page had numbers, letters, and names I didn't recognize. For 38 years, every Tuesday, Richard had done this. I asked softly, almost afraid to hear the answer. "What is this?" She looked at me kindly, but firmly. "Your husband was transferring money into an account. Not his account. Other accounts. Hundreds of accounts, actually. Different names. Different banks. Every week, faithfully. For decades." I blinked. My mind couldn't process it. I thought of the life we had built together. The quiet mornings. the evening walks, the Sunday dinners, and now I realized there was a whole life he had been leading that I didn't know. Why? I whispered. The banker shook her head. I don't know, ma'am. He never told us. Only he could access them. But there are letters, notes he left behind. I opened the first letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard's careful, small letters. To my beloved wife, it began. Tears blurred my vision. I read slowly. Every word was deliberate, gentle, loving. I have done this for you, for us, for the life I promised to protect. Please forgive that I kept this from you. One day, you may understand. I shook my head. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to laugh in disbelief. How could I have lived beside him all these years and not known this? How could someone you love hide such a thing, not out of malice, but love? The banker handed me another envelope. Inside were receipts, statements, notes, evidence of decades of secrecy. Richard had been saving, secretly, not for himself, but for me, for our future, for a plan he never shared. I sat back in my chair, my hands shaking, my heart racing. The world I thought I knew, the one we had built together, was suddenly bigger, more complex, and I realized I had never really known him. Not completely. And yet, in a strange, aching way, I felt closer to him than ever. Spent the next few days at home, going through Richard's papers. Every Tuesday, every bank statement, every note. It was all carefully organized. It wasn't chaotic or reckless. It was meticulous, methodical, thoughtful. I realized that the man I thought I knew had layers I never saw. He had a private world, built quietly, carefully. For me. There were letters to future recipients, people I didn't recognize. He had helped friends in secret. He had paid for education. He had given to charities anonymously. He had solved problems for people we didn't even know. Every Tuesday, the same brown jacket, the same careful smile, and the world never knew what he carried. I sat at the kitchen table one evening, a single lamp casting a soft glow. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock. I asked myself quietly, why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he trust me with this? And then I understood. He wasn't trying to keep me out. He was trying to protect me. From worrying, from responsibility, from knowing the truth too early. But the truth always finds a way. I thought of our life together, the quiet mornings, the soft dinners, the gentle walks. We had shared everything, or so I thought. And yet, these decades of secrets made me feel both distant and connected. I read another letter, written just last month. I hope she never has to worry. If she reads this, I am gone. But she will understand, in time, that this was always for her. I only wanted her to live without fear. I held the letter to my chest, and a wave of grief washed over me. I realized that Richard had given me the greatest gift anyone could give. His silent love, his protection, his careful devotion. Hidden in plain sight. I felt anger first. Anger that he had lived a part of his life away from me. But it quickly softened into awe. He had not cheated. He had not lied to harm. He had acted from love. That night, I sat in the dark, thinking of all those Tuesdays, all those years. I saw him walking to the car, briefcase in hand, jacket over his arm. The man I thought I knew, carrying a universe of secrets that were meant for no one else but me. And in that quiet moment, I felt a strange peace. Even in death, he had protected me. Even in secrecy, he had loved me fully. The days after I discovered Richard's secret were heavy. I would wake up and glance at the brown jacket still hanging in the closet. For decades, it had meant routine, normalcy. Now it felt like a symbol of a hidden world I had only just glimpsed. I sat at the kitchen table each morning with a cup of coffee, staring at the envelope of letters beside me. I read and reread them, hoping to piece together the man I thought I knew. One letter caught my attention, written in his careful, looping handwriting. I hope she never worries. If she ever finds this, know it was always for her. I only wanted her to live in peace. I felt tears sting my eyes, and for the first time in years, I let myself mourn not just for his death, but for the part of him I had never seen. I realized how much love he had poured into our life silently. Every Tuesday wasn't just a routine. It was devotion, sacrifice, a promise kept in quiet solitude. I asked myself again, why didn't he tell me? And then I understood. Richard's love was never about recognition. It wasn't about praise. It was about protection, about ensuring I would live a good life, free from worrying. I thought of the small things he had done, fixing the leaky faucet, making sure the bills were paid on time, preparing meals I never asked for. All those gestures, so ordinary, suddenly took on a profound weight. I walked through the house and touched the walls, the chairs, the photographs. Every corner held a memory, but also a secret piece of him. For 38 years, he had carried this burden quietly, and I had never noticed. I realized the truth. Love is not always spoken. Sometimes it is hidden in actions, in routines, in the little sacrifices we take for those we care about. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sun set in streaks of gold and orange. I thought about all the Tuesdays he had left, the small, steady steps he had taken without me knowing, and a quiet ache filled me, not of betrayal, but of awe and gratitude. Richard had lived a lifetime of love beside me, and only now, in his absence, did I truly see him. I spent hours going through Richard's folders, each document revealing more than the last. There were bank statements, letters, small notes tucked carefully between pages, every detail pointing to one thing. He had been planning for a future I never imagined. One folder had a stack of letters addressed to people I didn't recognize. Some were for friends we had known briefly, some for distant family members. Each one was handwritten, personal, and full of care. I am sorry I could not tell you sooner. Please use this gift wisely. For emergencies, for dreams, for hope. I realized that every Tuesday, every trip to the bank wasn't about money. It was about people. It was about giving, quietly, without expectation, without recognition. I remembered our conversations over the years, his quiet words, his gentle tone. I like to know that everything is taken care of. I had thought he meant bills or savings for us. Now I understood it was so much more than that. The letters weren't just about finances. They were about promises, about keeping people safe, about protecting those he cared for. He had been building a network of support, quietly, week after week, year after year. My chest ached with a mix of sadness and admiration. I had lived beside a man whose love was deeper than I had ever realized. And yet, there was a part of me that felt he excluded. For decades, I had trusted him, and he had never shared this with me. But then I thought again, perhaps that had been his gift, that I could live beside him without the weight of worrying, free to love him without distraction, without fear. I walked through the house and saw his favorite chair by the window. How many Tuesdays had he sat there after his bank visits, planning, calculating, thinking of others? I shivered at the thought. In that moment, I knew I had to honor him not just by grieving, but by understanding, by learning from the life he had led quietly, faithfully, and with intention. And somewhere deep in me, I made a promise. I would not let his years of hidden devotion be forgotten. I would carry it forward, in my own way, with the same quiet love he had shown. The next morning, I returned to the folders with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Each envelope, each note, felt like a whisper from Richard himself. I could almost hear his voice, calm and steady, telling me, I did this for love. I did this for you. One letter was different. It was addressed simply, to my wife, if she ever finds this. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The words were simple, but they carried decades of emotion. My dearest, I hope you are not angry with me for keeping this from you. I did not want to worry you, or to make you feel that you needed to share this burden. All I ever wanted was for you to live your life in peace, without knowing the many ways I quietly tried to help others and prepare for our future. Every Tuesday, I went to the bank to keep these promises. I moved money, I wrote letters, I kept notes, I built safety nets. Not for myself, but for the people I cared about, most especially you. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. I only ask that you forgive me for the secrecy. And remember that every act was made out of love. I paused, closing my eyes. Tears formed, not of anger, but of awe. This was the man I had married. The man I had shared decades with, and yet I had only now begun to understand him. I found more letters, some addressed to friends, some to strangers who had once asked for help. Some were small gestures of kindness, a scholarship for a student, a payment for a struggling family, a quiet donation to someone who would never know. He had lived a life of generosity in ways I could barely comprehend. I thought of our quiet mornings together, our soft dinners, our conversations. All those years, he had been weaving a life that protected others while giving me a normal, peaceful home. And I realized something profound. I had loved him, yes, but I had never truly known him. Not completely. Yet now, in this quiet, filled with letters and memories, I felt closer to him than ever. Richard's love had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Not loud, not boastful. Just steady, enduring, unwavering. And in discovering it, I began to see the world differently, not just the life I had shared with him, but the kind of quiet devotion a human heart is capable of. I spent the morning walking through the house, holding one of Richard's letters in my hands. Each one reminded me of the careful, quiet life he had built beside mine, a life I had never truly seen. I began to call some of the people mentioned in the letters. Not everyone answered. Some voices on the other end were trembling, some quiet, some filled with gratitude I could barely understand. Richard, he helped us when no one else would, one woman whispered. He paid for my son's education. We didn't even know it was him. I sat down, stunned, the letter trembling in my hand. He had touched so many lives, silently. And all this time, I had only known the man who made dinner, fixed the sink, and walked quietly beside me. It hit me how small my world had been, how much of life had been happening around me while I thought I was seeing everything. I realized something else too. Richard had not just been generous, he had been wise. He had protected me from worrying, from the burden of knowing, from the heavy weight of responsibility he carried for others. I remembered the brown jacket, the way he smiled as he walked out the door every Tuesday. He wasn't leaving me out. He was making sure I was safe, calm, and happy. While he quietly carried the weight of so many lives, I sat in his favorite chair, the one by the window. I could almost see him there, planning, calculating, thinking of the people he loved. And suddenly, the house felt alive in a way it never had before. It wasn't just our life. It was his life, interwoven with mine, layered with secrets, acts of love, and devotion I could never have imagined. I cried then, not just for his death, but for the years I had missed, the Tuesdays I had watched him go, without knowing the world he carried in his hands. I realized how little I had understood him, and yet, in that sorrow, I felt gratitude. Because even though I had never seen the full scope of his life, I had loved him. And now, in his absence, I was beginning to know him. Richard had left a world of kindness behind, and I was entrusted with it, quietly, carefully, as he always had been. I returned to the folders one evening, the house silent except for the soft hum of the heater. Each envelope, each letter seemed heavier now, full of purpose I had only begun to understand. Then I found it, a letter addressed just to me, different from the rest. No date, no name, just to my wife. Always, I unfolded it slowly. The words leapt off the page, as if Richard were sitting beside me, speaking directly to my heart. My dearest, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I hope you are not angry that I kept so much from you. My intentions were never to hide or deceive. but to protect you, to protect our life together, and to help those I loved in ways I could manage alone, every Tuesday. For 38 years, I carried out this work quietly. I ensured that promises were kept, that debts were paid, that help reached the people who needed it most. And all the while, I returned home to you, hoping that our life remained calm, warm, and happy. I know now that the silence may feel like distance, but know that every act, every secret, was filled with love. Even in death, I hope you understand this truth. I loved you beyond words, beyond routine, beyond life itself. I put the letter down and pressed my hands to my face. I could feel his presence in the room, not as a ghost, but as a quiet, enduring love that had shaped everything. For decades, he had carried not only our life, but the lives of countless others. He had woven a tapestry of care, of protection, of generosity, and I had only glimpsed it now, at the edge of grief. I thought about all those Tuesdays, the careful routine, the brown jacket, the quiet smile. Every act had meaning I never knew. Every step he took had purpose. Every secret he kept had been for love. And in that moment, I realized my grief was mixed with awe. I mourned the man I thought I knew, but I also celebrated the man I had now discovered. The man whose love was far greater than I had ever imagined. For the first time, I understood the full depth of Richard's heart, and I felt an emotion more complex than sorrow, a quiet, unshakable reverence. He had lived his life beside me, and yet he had given the world beyond me, and in doing so, he had left me a legacy I would carry forever. Part 9. The days that followed felt surreal. I moved through the house as though I were walking through someone else's memories. Every object, every corner, reminded me of Richard, his presence, his routines, his quiet devotion. But now I carried something else. Knowledge, understanding, a secret too beautiful and heavy for words. I began sharing pieces of it with close friends, carefully, cautiously. Their reactions were a mix of awe and disbelief. He was remarkable, one whispered. Yes, but why didn't he ever tell you? Another asked. I didn't have an answer, not fully. Some things I realized were never meant to be explained. They were meant to be felt, experienced, internalized. I spent long hours sitting by the window, watching the world outside. The same world Richard had left each Tuesday, quietly carrying out acts of care, of love, of protection. I thought of the countless lives he had touched, unknown to the world. Neighbors, distant relatives, friends, even strangers. Each one a silent testimony to the kind of man he had been. And I thought of myself, how much I had missed, how much I had taken for granted. But instead of regret, a strange calm settled in me. I understood now that love is not always visible. It doesn't always announce itself with words or gestures. Sometimes it is carried quietly, faithfully, hidden in plain sight. I began to imagine all those Tuesdays Richard, in his brown jacket, walking to the car, stepping into the cold morning, handling the world with care, and then returning home to me. Every act deliberate, every action meaningful, every secret a gift. And I realized something important. True love is not measured by what we see, but by what we feel, by the quiet devotion that shapes, lives, even when it remains unseen. That understanding changed me. I became softer, slower, more patient. I began to appreciate the small gestures, the everyday moments, the quiet people who shape our lives without recognition. Richard had given me more than a life. He had given me a lesson, a guide to understanding love in its deepest, quietest form. And I promised myself, silently, that I would carry that lesson forward. Not with fanfare, not with announcements, but quietly, faithfully, like he had taught me. Weeks passed, and the house began to feel different. It was no longer just empty because Richard was gone. It was alive with memory, with understanding, with the quiet echo of his devotion. I started organizing the letters and notes, carefully filing them by date, by purpose, by person. Each one told a story not just of my husband, but of the lives he had touched, the burdens he had lifted, the hope he had given. I realized that his love had been bigger than our home, bigger than our marriage, bigger than I could have ever imagined. It reached into the world in quiet, powerful ways. Sometimes I would sit by the window, holding one letter, reading it slowly, and feel a presence beside me. Not ghostly, not frightening, just calm, loving, steady. Richard's love was there, in every corner of our home, in every memory, in every act he had quietly performed. I began thinking about the lessons he had left me. Not lessons about money, not lessons about routine, but lessons about life, about love, about giving without expectation. I knew then that I had a choice. I could mourn only, or I could honor him. I could let his life fade into memory, or I could carry forward the love he had given in secret. And so I began to act. I contacted the people who had been helped by his generosity. I listened to their stories. I learned the impact he had made without ever asking for recognition. Each story brought tears to my eyes. Each act of kindness he had performed reminded me of the man I had lived beside. I realized that Richard had not only given me love, he had given me purpose, a way to see the world differently, to understand that quiet devotion, even when unseen, can ripple through lives in ways we may never fully grasp. And I understood another truth. We never fully know the people we love, but we can discover them, even after they are gone, in the actions they leave behind. Richard had been my husband, my partner, my friend, and now he was my teacher, my guide, my example of the kind of love the world needs more of. I smiled softly, tears running down my cheeks, realizing that even in his absence, he had made me a better person, and I would honor that every day, quietly, faithfully, just as he had. The weeks turned into months, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. I still missed Richard, of course, the way he would hum softly in the kitchen, the way he would quietly fix anything that was broken, the way he always knew when I needed comfort without me saying a word. But now I carried him differently in my heart. I carried his lessons, his secrets, his devotion. I carried the understanding that love can be silent, steadfast and unseen, yet powerful beyond measure. I began sharing his story carefully with those I trusted, not to boast, not to create attention, but to honor the man who had lived so quietly, giving so much. I saw how his life had touched people in ways I had never imagined. The students he had helped, the families he had supported, the friends who had received aid without ever knowing it came from him. It was staggering. One man told me, I never met him personally, but he changed my life forever. I realized then that Richard's true gift wasn't money, or letters or accounts. It was love made actionable. Love expressed through commitment, responsibility, and sacrifice. And I began to see my own life differently. I understood that I didn't have to do great things to honor him. Even the small acts of kindness, the quiet gestures, could echo the love he had shown. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting a golden glow across the living room, I sat in his favorite chair. I picked up a letter and read it again. I hope she never worries. I did this for her. I only wanted her to live in peace. I smiled softly. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun outside. It was him. It was his love. It was his heart reaching across time, reminding me to live fully, to love fully, and to act with quiet generosity. And in that moment, I knew peace. Not the absence of grief, not the forgetting of sorrow, but the presence of understanding. The knowledge that love, even hidden, is never wasted. The realization that devotion can outlive the person and transform the hearts of those who remain. I closed the letter and whispered softly, "Thank you, Richard, for everything." And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. Time moves slowly when you carry a heart full of memories. I have lived many Tuesdays without Richard now, yet I still feel him in the quiet spaces of our home. The brown jacket still hangs in the closet, untouched, a symbol of decades of devotion, routine and love. I often sit by the window in the evenings, watching the world as he once did. The streets, the neighbors, the leaves falling in golden light, they all remind me of him, of his steady presence, of the life he built beside me quietly, without fanfare. I look back at the folders, the letters, the evidence of a secret life that was never meant to be, known until the time was right. I see now that love is not always spoken. It is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is measured in silent actions, in consistency, in devotion carried out quietly for decades. I have learned more about him since he has been gone than I ever did when he was alive, and that is a strange kind of blessing, a kind of gift only absence can bring, the gift of understanding the depth of someone's heart. I think about the lessons Richard left me, that love can be quiet, steadfast, and invisible to the world. That small, consistent acts of care can change lives in ways you may never see. That devotion is often measured not by words, but by commitment and sacrifice. And most of all, that even in silence, love can speak louder than any words ever could. I also think about myself. I am softer now, more patient, more understanding, more aware of the quiet people in my life who carry burdens I may never fully know. I try to live in a way that honors him, by giving quietly, loving fully, and living with care. And sometimes, when the house is still and the evening light is soft, I feel him with me, not as a shadow or a ghost, but as a presence, a reminder, a guide. I hear the gentle echo of his voice in the rhythm of our home, in the little routines we shared, in the way I now see the world differently. Richard may be gone, but his love remains. It remains in the lives he touched, the hearts he changed, and in mine, forever. And in that quiet understanding, I have found peace. A deep, enduring, gentle peace that whispers, love is never wasted. Love, even when hidden, always matters. And sometimes, the greatest gift is a love that works silently, shaping lives and hearts long after the giver is gone. I take a deep breath, feeling warmth in my chest, and smile softly, because now I know him fully, and I carry him with me every Tuesday, every day for the rest of my life. I found myself wandering through old photographs one afternoon, pictures of birthdays, anniversaries, quiet Sunday mornings. Richard always stood quietly in the background, never needing to be the center of attention. But now, looking at those photos, I noticed things I hadn't seen before: the way he smiled at someone quietly, the gentle touch of his hand on a friend's shoulder, the calm way he held our child's hand. I remembered our first home together, a small, cozy apartment with a creaky floor and peeling paint. Richard had spent months fixing it little by little, painting walls, tightening loose knobs, fixing the kitchen sink himself instead of hiring someone. I had never realized then how meticulous and dedicated he was. I recalled Tuesday mornings, the same routine I had once thought ordinary. He would leave with his brown jacket, a small leather satchel in hand, and a faint smile. I thought it was just his way of keeping life organized. Now I knew it was far more than that. It was the start of his secret work. A ritual of care and devotion that would quietly shape so many lives. I picked up an old calendar, marked with tiny notes he had made for decades. Appointments, birthdays, bank reminders. But hidden among them were tiny codes, small hints that only he would understand. Every detail mattered to him. Every action had a purpose. Sitting there, surrounded by memories, I realized how little I had truly noticed him. I had loved him deeply, yes, but I had seen only a fraction of the life he carried quietly beside mine. And now, in his absence, those small moments became monumental. Each memory was a clue to the depth of his heart, a whisper of the man I was just beginning to understand. The house was quiet, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. I closed the photo album and breathed slowly, feeling a mix of sorrow, admiration, and awe. Richard had been my husband, my partner, my friend, but he had also been a silent guardian, a secret benefactor, a man whose heart was larger than I could ever have imagined. The next day, I opened a small box tucked away at the back of Richard's desk drawer. Inside were letters he had written to people I didn't know, friends of friends, distant relatives, even complete strangers. Each envelope was carefully addressed, each note penned in his familiar, meticulous handwriting. I picked up the first one. It was addressed to a young woman named Emily. "Dear Emily," it began, "I hope this finds you well. I know life can feel heavy at times, and I cannot always be there to help directly. Please accept this gift, a small step to help you pursue your dreams. Use it wisely. Remember, there are people who care, even if you cannot see them." I read it slowly, absorbing the gentle tone, the care behind every word. Richard had not just sent money. He had sent hope. He had given people a chance when the world might have overlooked them. There were letters to students struggling with tuition fees, to families facing medical emergencies, to single mothers who had asked for help quietly. Some envelopes contained checks. Some had instructions for anonymous assistance. Every act was private, deliberate, and full of love. I felt tears prick my eyes. I had known Richard as my husband, as a quiet, devoted partner. But this was a man whose heart had no boundaries. He had lived decades carrying the burdens of others, lifting them in silence, never asking for recognition. I began contacting some of the recipients. Their stories came out in whispers and soft sobs. "He changed my life," said one student. "I never met him, but he made it possible for me to finish college," said another. And with every story, I felt a mixture of grief, awe, and pride. Richard's life had been far bigger than I had realized, and his love had not been limited to our home. It extended into the world, touching lives, making futures brighter, giving hope where it had been lost. I sat at the desk for hours, reading, listening, weeping quietly. Every letter, every story, every act of kindness reminded me, love does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is hidden, waiting to be discovered. Sometimes it is the quiet guardian of lives we may never fully know. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would honor him by remembering, by sharing, and by carrying forward the quiet generosity he had shown throughout his life. As the days went on, a new feeling began to settle over me: regret. Not for his death, not entirely, but for the years I had lived beside him without truly knowing him. I thought I knew Richard. I thought I understood his heart. But now I realized how little I had seen. How little I had understood, how much I had missed. I remembered small moments, his quiet smiles, his Tuesday routines, the way he would sometimes leave the house without a word. I had assumed it was ordinary. I had assumed it was mundane. But now I knew that every small step he took, every quiet act, had been part of a life I had never fully witnessed. I walked through the house slowly, touching objects he had handled, noticing little details I had ignored for decades: the worn corner of his favorite chair, the neat arrangement of tools on the shelf, the subtle scent of his cologne lingering in the coat closet. Everything whispered secrets I had never heard before. I felt a pang of guilt. Why hadn't I asked more questions? Why hadn't I been more attentive? Why hadn't I noticed the extraordinary life he had been living quietly beside mine? And yet, amidst the guilt, there was understanding. Richard had chosen to shield me from worrying. He had carried his burdens silently so that I could live peacefully, without fear. His secrecy was not deception, it was devotion. I remembered a conversation we had decades ago, long before retirement, long before routine had taken over our days. "I like to keep things in order," he said. "I like to make sure everything is right before anyone even knows it." I had laughed and nodded, never guessing the true depth of his words. Now, every Tuesday, every bank visit, every note made sense. Richard had been working quietly, faithfully, selflessly, and I had judged it as ordinary. I sat down and wept, not just for my grief, but for my ignorance. For decades, I had shared a life with a man whose love was far deeper than I had imagined, and only now, in his absence, did I see it fully. But even in that regret, a quiet warmth emerged, because now I understood, because now I could honor him, because now I could carry his lessons forward. Richard had lived a life of love I had not fully recognized, but I would make sure that recognition, that understanding, lived on. The more I delved into Richard's letters and notes, the more I realized the breadth of his quiet generosity. Each Tuesday visit to the bank was a ripple of kindness, touching lives I had never imagined. There was a young man named Daniel, struggling to pay for medical treatment for his sick mother. Richard had set up a trust in his name, transferring money bit by bit every month until the bills were fully covered. Daniel had never known who helped him, only that a stranger's care had saved his family from despair. Then there was a small family in another state, Helen struggling with rent after a sudden layoff. Richard had quietly paid several months' worth, leaving only a small note. Use this wisely. Someone cares. They had assumed it was a random act of kindness from a local charity. I knew the truth now, and my heart ached at his humility. He had helped former students, neighbors in quiet emergencies, and even people we had met only once at gatherings. All of it was done without recognition. No letters, no announcements, no public praise. Just quiet love expressed through thoughtful, deliberate action. I began to understand the man I had lived beside for 42 years. He was not just a devoted husband, not just a loving father, he was a guardian of hope, a man who had carried the burdens of others so silently, so faithfully, that the world never knew how vast his heart truly was. I read a letter from a woman named Marissa, who had struggled with tuition fees to finish college. I will never forget the help that came when I needed it most. Whoever did this may never know how much it changed my life, but I will always carry gratitude in my heart. I felt tears blur my vision. Richard had made the impossible possible for so many, and yet he had returned home to me each time, unchanged, quiet, ordinary in the eyes of the world. Sitting in his study, surrounded by letters, envelopes, and old receipts, I began to grasp a truth far bigger than myself. Love is not always visible. Greatness does not always shout, and the quietest acts often leave the deepest impact. I realized I had been given a gift beyond measure, a chance to see love in its purest, most selfless form. And I promised myself, softly, that I would honor him, not by announcing his deeds, not by boasting, but by carrying forward the same quiet kindness he had shown for decades. After weeks of going through Richard's letters, folders, and accounts, I began to notice a change within myself. It wasn't sudden, but quiet, almost imperceptible at first. I found myself pausing more, observing more, appreciating the small things in life that I had taken for granted. I started with small acts, making a neighbor's cup of tea, leaving a note of encouragement for a friend, checking in on someone who had been struggling quietly. It felt strange at first, almost awkward, but with every little act, I felt Richard's presence beside me. His love had always been quiet, selfless, deliberate, and now I wanted to live that way too. I reflected on the way I had judged him in my ignorance. I had thought his Tuesday routines where I had loved him deeply. Yes, but I had seen only a fraction of the life he carried quietly beside mine. And now, in his absence, those small moments became monumental. Each memory was a clue to the depth of his heart, a whisper of the man I was just beginning to understand. The house was quiet, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. I closed the photo album and breathed slowly, feeling a mix of sorrow, admiration, and awe. Richard had been my husband, my partner, my friend, but he had also been a silent guardian, a secret benefactor, a man whose heart was larger than I could ever have imagined. The next day, I opened a small box tucked away at the back of Richard's desk drawer. Inside were letters he had written to people I didn't know, friends of friends, distant relatives, even complete strangers. Each envelope was carefully addressed, each note penned in his familiar, meticulous handwriting. I picked up the first one. It was addressed to a young woman named Emily. "Dear Emily," it began, "I hope this finds you well. I know life can feel heavy at times, and I cannot always be there to help directly. Please accept this gift, a small step to help you pursue your dreams. Use it wisely. Remember, there are people who care, even if you cannot see them." I read it slowly, absorbing the gentle tone, the care behind every word. Richard had not just sent money. He had sent hope. He had given people a chance when the world might have overlooked them. There were letters to students struggling with tuition fees, to families facing medical emergencies, to single mothers who had asked for help quietly. Some envelopes contained checks. Some had instructions for anonymous assistance. Every act was private, deliberate, and full of love. I felt tears prick my eyes. I had known Richard as my husband, as a quiet, devoted partner. But this was a man whose heart had no boundaries. He had lived decades carrying the burdens of others, lifting them in silence, never asking for recognition. I began contacting some of the recipients. Their stories came out in whispers and soft sobs. "He changed my life," said one student. "I never met him, but he made it possible for me to finish college," said another. And with every story, I felt a mixture of grief, awe, and pride. Richard's life had been far bigger than I had realized, and his love had not been limited to our home. It extended into the world, touching lives, making futures brighter, giving hope where it had been lost. I sat at the desk for hours, reading, listening, weeping quietly. Every letter, every story, every act of kindness reminded me, love does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is hidden, waiting to be discovered. Sometimes it is the quiet guardian of lives we may never fully know. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would honor him by remembering, by sharing, and by carrying forward the quiet generosity he had shown throughout his life. As the days went on, a new feeling began to settle over me: regret. Not for his death, not entirely, but for the years I had lived beside him without truly knowing him. I thought I knew Richard. I thought I understood his heart. But now I realized how little I had seen, how little I had understood, how much I had missed. I remembered small moments, his quiet smiles, his Tuesday routines, the way he would sometimes leave the house without a word. I had assumed it was ordinary. I had assumed it was mundane. But now I knew that every small step he took, every quiet act, had been part of a life I had never fully witnessed. I walked through the house slowly, touching objects he had handled, noticing little details I had ignored for decades: the worn corner of his favorite chair, the neat arrangement of tools on the shelf, the subtle scent of his cologne lingering in the coat closet. Everything whispered secrets I had never heard before. I felt a pang of guilt. Why hadn't I asked more questions? Why hadn't I been more attentive? Why hadn't I noticed the extraordinary life he had been living quietly beside mine? And yet, amidst the guilt, there was understanding. Richard had chosen to shield me from worrying. He had carried his burdens silently so that I could live peacefully, without fear. His secrecy was not deception, it was devotion. I remembered a conversation we had decades ago, long before retirement, long before routine had taken over our days. "I like to keep things in order," he said. "I like to make sure everything is right before anyone even knows it." I had laughed and nodded, never guessing the true depth of his words. Now, every Tuesday, every bank visit, every note made sense. Richard had been working quietly, faithfully, selflessly, and I had judged it as ordinary. I sat down and wept, not just for my grief, but for my ignorance. For decades, I had shared a life with a man whose love was far deeper than I had imagined. And only now, in his absence, did I see it fully. But even in that regret, a quiet warmth emerged. Because now I understood. Because now I could honor him. Because now I could carry his lessons forward. Richard had lived a life of love I had not fully recognized, but I would make sure that recognition, that understanding, lived on. The more I delved into Richard's letters and notes, the more I realized the breadth of his quiet generosity. Each Tuesday visit to the bank was a ripple of kindness, touching lives I had never imagined. There was a young man named Daniel, struggling to pay for medical treatment for his sick mother. Richard had set up a trust in his name, transferring money bit by bit every month until the bills were fully covered. Daniel had never known who helped him, only that a stranger's care had saved his family from despair. Then there was a small family in another state, tenants struggling with rent after a sudden layoff. Richard had quietly paid several months' worth, leaving only a small note. "Use this wisely. Someone cares." They had assumed it was a random act of kindness from a local charity. I knew the truth now, and my heart ached at his humility. He had helped former students, neighbors in quiet emergencies, and even people we had met only once at gatherings. All of it was done without recognition. No letters, no announcements, no public praise. Ordinary. I had thought his secrecy was distance. Now I understood. His life had been extraordinary, full of purpose and compassion. I began to see my own life differently. The small frustrations, the daily routines, they all seemed smaller now, less important. The quiet moments with my children, the walks in the park, the simple conversations over tea, they had more meaning than I realized. I thought about the people Richard had helped, their gratitude, their stories, their hope. He had created a ripple effect without ever asking for recognition, and I realized that I could do the same. I didn't need grand gestures or wealth. I could offer time, kindness, attention, and understanding. Even small acts mattered. Sitting in the living room one evening, I closed my eyes and pictured Richard. Not the man who left for the bank every Tuesday, but the man I now fully understood, the man whose heart was vast, whose love was silent, whose life was a lesson in devotion, and I felt a quiet determination. I wanted to live in a way that honored him, not by trying to replicate his deeds exactly, but by embracing his spirit, by loving quietly, giving without expectation, and living with intentional care. That night, as I lit a candle by the window and watched the sunset, I whispered softly, "Richard, I understand now. I will carry your love forward." And in that quiet moment, I felt a shift in my heart, a transformation that would guide the rest of my life. As I spent more time with Richard's letters and records, a pattern began to emerge. It was subtle at first, hidden in the margins of notes, in the way he dated letters, in the timing of his bank visits. Every action he had taken for decades was connected, carefully planned, each step building toward a larger purpose. I began mapping it out on paper, just for myself. There were students helped in sequence, families supported through emergencies, letters sent to ensure people could rebuild their lives. It was as though he had been conducting a quiet symphony of kindness. With each note perfectly timed and placed, there were students helped in sequence, families supported through emergencies, letters sent to ensure people could rebuild their lives. It was as though he had been conducting a quiet symphony of kindness, with each note perfectly timed and placed. I realized how much thought had gone into every act. This wasn't random generosity. It was strategic, intentional, and deeply empathetic. Richard had anticipated needs before anyone even voiced them. He had studied situations, predicted outcomes, and quietly ensured that those who struggled would receive support. I thought back to his Tuesday routine, the trips to the bank, the careful entries in ledgers, the letters tucked away in neat envelopes. It all made sense now. Each Tuesday was a thread in a web of care that spanned years, lives, and places we had never even visited. I began to feel a deep sense of awe. The man I had lived beside, the quiet husband I thought I knew, had been orchestrating a life of love far beyond our home. It was not just generosity, it was foresight, wisdom, and devotion in its purest form. I looked around our home, everything quiet, everything normal. No one would ever suspect the scale of what he had done, and I understood that was part of his intent, to act without recognition, to change lives without ever needing praise. It hit me then, Richard had been teaching me, even in his silence, teaching me that love is strategic, purposeful, and often invisible. That true devotion is measured not by applause, but by the lives it touches and the hope it plants. I sat down with his letters spread before me and whispered softly, "I see you now, Richard. I understand the world you carried in your hands, and I will not let it fade." For the first time, the full weight and brilliance of his life became clear to me, and I knew that I had a responsibility not just to remember, but to continue in my own quiet way. The legacy he had built. The days passed, but I remained absorbed in Richard's world, a world of quiet, deliberate love. It taught me lessons I had never learned in books, never heard in speeches, and never fully understood in my own marriage. The first lesson: love is not always loud. Richard had loved me, our children, and countless strangers without ever announcing it. He had given, protected, and cared in silence. And in that silence, his love had been stronger, steadier, more enduring than anything I had imagined. The second lesson: kindness does not require recognition. Many of the people he helped would never know who had touched their lives. Some may never even realize the source of their relief or hope, yet he did it anyway, without seeking praise or acknowledgement. I realized that true generosity is invisible, humble, and selfless. The third lesson: small acts can create monumental impact. Every letter, every check, every Tuesday trip to the bank was small in itself. Yet, strung together over decades, they transformed lives. He had built a network of care that silently supported dozens, maybe hundreds of people. The cumulative effect was extraordinary, though each act was ordinary. The fourth lesson: understanding comes with patience and observation. I had assumed I knew him, but it took years of reflection, letters, and evidence to truly see his heart. I realized how little we sometimes notice the depth of the people we love. Patience, attentiveness, and empathy are required to truly understand another human being. The fifth and perhaps most important lesson: love is about action, not just words. Richard did not need to tell me he loved me in grand declarations. His actions spoke louder than any sentence, any promise, or any vow. And in seeing his life fully, I understood that love is measured by dedication, sacrifice, and the consistent care we extend to others. Sitting quietly by the window one evening, I felt the truth of all these lessons settle in my heart. I understood that my grief was intertwined with gratitude, that my sorrow was tempered by awe. Richard's life had been a guide for me, even in his absence, a blueprint of how to live with love, intention, and humility. I whispered softly to the empty room, "Thank you, Richard, for showing me what love really means, for teaching me the quiet lessons that will guide my life from now on." And in that quiet, I felt him beside me, not as a shadow, but as a presence, a teacher, a reminder of what a devoted heart can achieve. Part 20. After weeks of reflection, I realized that understanding Richard's life was not enough. I had to act. I had to let his lessons guide me, let his love inspire my actions. His legacy could not end with his death, it had to continue. Quietly, faithfully, deliberately. I started small. I reached out to neighbors I barely knew, checking in, offering help with errands, listening when they needed someone to talk to. It felt awkward at first, but slowly it became natural. Each small act reminded me of Richard's quiet consistency, the way he had touched lives without recognition, without applause, simply because it was the right thing to do. Then I thought of the letters he had written to strangers, the lives he had touched silently. I began contacting some of those people, ensuring that the support he had provided was still effective, helping where I could, passing along kindness in his name. Every phone call, every note, every act of care reminded me that love multiplied when shared. I also started teaching my children, gently, without words of judgment, the importance of quiet generosity, not through lectures, but through actions, showing them how to notice someone struggling, how to offer help without seeking recognition, how to act with intention. Richard had always lived these lessons, and now I wanted to make sure the next generation carried them forward. At times, I would sit by the window, imagining Richard walking past the same streets he had walked for decades. I could see him making his Tuesday trips, smiling softly, touching lives, making the world a little better. And now I felt that same spirit within me. I was continuing the rhythm he had started, small step by small step. I realized something profound. Love is not measured by grand gestures alone. It is measured by consistency, by quiet attention, by intentional care for the lives around us. Richard's life had been proof of this, and now my life would be too. Every day, I found ways to honor him. A meal prepared for someone alone, a letter sent to encourage a struggling friend, a donation to a cause he had cared about, all small acts. But each one a thread in the fabric of love he had begun decades ago. And in doing so, I felt Richard's presence not as a ghost, but as a guiding force. Every action reminded me that love endures, even when the person who gave it is gone. It grows, spreads, and shapes the world in ways we may never fully see. I whispered softly, looking out at the quiet streets bathed in evening light. Richard, your love lives on, and I will carry it forward, as you always intended. Months passed, and slowly, the house began to feel lighter. The weight of grief was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer just sorrow, it was gratitude, awe, and a quiet joy that came from understanding the depth of Richard's life. I began to notice small things that brought comfort. The way sunlight fell across the kitchen floor, the gentle sound of rain tapping the windows, the soft hum of the heater on a winter evening. These ordinary moments, once overlooked, now felt sacred because they were reminders of the life Richard had lived and the love he had shared. I kept revisiting the letters, the notes, the records of his kindness. Every story I heard from the people he had helped became a thread connecting me to him. I felt his presence not as a shadow of the past, but as a living force in my life. His love was a guide, leading me toward compassion, patience, and understanding. I also began to see my own grief differently. It was not a sign of weakness or loss, it was a reflection of the depth of my love for him. Grief was proof that his life had mattered, not just to me, but to everyone whose life he had touched. And through that grief, I found healing. Sometimes I would sit quietly in the living room, the house still except for the faint creak of the floorboards. I would close my eyes and imagine him there, smiling softly, his brown jacket hanging neatly on the coat rack, his hand reaching out in guidance. And in those moments, I felt a calmness that was almost like a hug, almost like reassurance. I realized that healing did not mean forgetting. It did not mean moving on. It meant carrying his memory forward, living in a way that honored the life he had built. and finding peace in knowing that love, even when silent, leaves a lasting mark, I whispered to the empty room. Thank you, Richard, for everything. For your life, your love, your quiet devotion. I will carry it forward, always. And for the first time in many months, I felt truly whole. Not because he was gone or because the pain had disappeared, but because I had understood the extraordinary depth of his heart, and I had let it change mine. The years have passed. And life has settled into a rhythm that is quieter, gentler, and richer in meaning. I have learned that love is not measured by grand declarations or visible gestures. It is measured by the quiet devotion, the intentional acts, the silent sacrifices that ripple outward and touch lives in ways we may never see. Richard's love was like that, a river flowing steadily, unseen, nourishing the world around him. I often sit by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, imagining him walking the streets he once walked, carrying hope in his hands. And I smile because I understand now he has not left me. His love continues in me, in the lives he touched, and in the lessons he left behind. I think of our children, who now understand in small ways what true love looks like. I think of the strangers who were helped quietly, who may never know the source of their hope. I think of the countless small acts that make up a life, a legacy, a story worth telling. And I have come to a soft, enduring truth. Grief does not erase love. Loss does not diminish devotion. Even in absence, love persists, quietly, powerfully, eternally. I whisper softly to the empty house, to the memories, to the life we shared. Thank you, Richard, for every Tuesday, every secret act, every moment of devotion. I see you now, and I carry you with me, always. And in that quiet understanding, I have found peace. A peace that is gentle, calm, and full of hope. A peace that reminds me, love, when lived fully even, silently leaves a mark on the world that no passing of time can ever erase. Richard may have walked his path alone, quietly for decades, but his love lives on. In me, in our children, in the people he helped, and in the hearts of all who now understand that the greatest gift we can give is not recognition, not applause, but the quiet, enduring love that changes lives without ever needing notice. The sun sets, the house is still, and I sit in calm reflection, feeling the warmth of a life fully loved, fully lived.